Greetings and thanks for joining us here today. I want to start our time off this evening with a devotional. And let me begin by just, sharing with you a brief story. Years ago when I was in seminary, I was fortunate enough to be able to be taught by some brilliant and compassionate professors. One of them in particular was Dr. Dale Cross. Dr. Cross, and what a fascinating name to be in ministry, taught my urban and contextual ministry class. And it was during our course of study that Dr. Cross really taught me, and he emphasized a lot the need to be able to balance dignity and charity when we engage and serve in various communities, whether locally or globally. Now, outside the walls of academia, Dr. Cross worked and served in communities across the metropolitan Atlanta where the need for charity was very, very real. In the communities in which he served, they suffer from many aspects of poverty. For example, the lack of access to healthy food, inadequate clothing, unemployment, absence of financial institutions, unsafe places to live and to attend school. Dr. Cross taught that there was a real need to help other people, but we needed to be able simultaneously to respect and nurture people's dignity. Balancing charity and dignity is a challenge that all Christians face when we're trying to serve, particularly those in Christian leadership. We begin to engage the poor, either if it's a congregation, local church, or a local community, or even a broader community or global community. This challenge is ever present. I think this is why Jesus taught his disciples that we would always have the poor among us. That's in John 12, verse 8. And throughout all of Scripture, we are taught the need to serve the poor and the marginalized and the oppressed. However, the poor, and all of us along with them, we're all created in the image of God. And as image bearers of God, we are to respect and to encourage the expression of this God-bearing image. Just recently, I was reminded of a story in the Old Testament that highlights this challenge and I think provides a balanced response. And I wanted to share that with you this evening. It's found in 1 Kings chapter 17, verse 7 through 24. And it is the story of the great prophet Elijah and the widow of Zarephath. And I'll begin here in verse 7. It says, sometime later the brook dried up because there had been no rain in the land. And then the word of the Lord came to him. That's Elijah. And the Lord said, go at once to Zarephath of Sidon, and I want you to stay there. I've commanded a widow in that place to supply you with food. And so he went to Zarephath. And when he came to the town gate, a widow was there gathering sticks. And he called to her and he asked, would you bring me a little water in a jar so that I may have a drink? And as she was going to get it, he called out, and bring me, please, a piece of bread. And she replies, as surely as the Lord your God lives, I don't have any bread, only a handful of flour in a jar and a little bit of oil in a jug. I'm gathering a few sticks to take home and make a meal for myself and my son, that we may eat it and die. And Elijah said to her, don't be afraid. Go home and do as you have said, but first make a small cake of bread for me from what you have and bring it to me. And then make something for yourself and your son. But this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. The jar of the flour will not be used up, and the jug of oil will not run dry until the day the Lord gives rain on this land. She went away and did as Elijah had told her. And so there was food every day for Elijah, the woman, and her family. For the jar of flour was not used up, and the jug of oil did not run dry, in keeping with the word of the Lord spoken by Elijah. From all appearances and what is readily accessible to our orthodoxy, what we believe, and our orthopraxy, what we practice, is the story of this widow who, on all accounts, seems to be extremely impoverished and who's in desperate need of help and a blessing. And this blessing happens to come at the engagement of one of God's great prophets, Elijah. Well, let's start off talking about what we really know about this woman. Well, for starters, this woman is nameless. She has no name in this story. She's the widow. So we don't know really what to call her. Besides being nameless, she is a widow. meaning that she has no husband. We don't know why, but in the immediate context, we know that being a widow meant you were not only probably poor, but you were the poor of the poorest, because you were dependent upon the generosity of other people in order to survive. So she's nameless. She's a widow. She's also a single mother. When Elijah approaches her, she's in the process of gathering sticks along with her little meager resources of flour and oil to make a last meal for her and her son. You know, people's circumstances never really convey the whole story. This single mother, think about this, is trying to raise a son by herself in the midst of a severe famine. I can only begin to imagine that she probably has spent all of her income, and she's probably exhausted all of her social connections in order to survive. There's no one else she can call and ask or borrow from. And her life at this point had spiraled downward to the point that she's actually probably going to find some joy in eating a last meal with her son. So not only is she nameless, and not only is she a widow, and not only is she a single mother, she is also a foreigner. She is not part of Israel. She lives in Zarephath in Sidon. And therefore, she is not a member of Israel. And she's not under the protection associated with all the Israelite strict laws for the care, concern, and compassion that was rendered by God for widows and orphans. Again, from all accounts, this widow really needs some help. And I think all of us here, if we saw her, we would jump at the opportunity to help this widow out. Well, let's look at Elijah, and what do we know about him? Well, unlike the widow, Elijah has a name. He's not nameless. In fact, Elijah's name has a great meaning. His name means Jehovah is my God. That's amazing. I remember how I became so fascinated as a child to know that my first name, Benjamin, and my middle name, Uriah, were actually biblical Hebrew names, and Benjamin meant son of the right hand. But really what struck me was my middle name is Uriah, and it means Yahweh is my light. I guess I really lucked out with the biblical names. While the descriptor for the woman is widow, for Elijah, it is prophet. And what a significant difference in how people would view them. As prophet, Elijah was actually under the care of God Almighty. In the text prior to our immediate text, it describes the early phase of this famine where God actually places Elijah by a river where he is fed by ravens on a daily basis. He is taken care of. And again, unlike the widow, Elijah is not a foreigner to Israel. In fact, you would call Elijah the ultimate insider. And being an insider and having membership in Israel, it meant that it came with blessings, protections, and privileges. And being a prophet meant even greater privileges for Elijah. So in this story, there seems to be an imbalance in the respective relationship. And let's just say, for the sake of argument, that Elijah is above the widow for all the reasons I just articulated. Now, is there a way that we can open up this text here and look at it from other angles and see that there might be room to explore this principle of mutuality? And by mutuality, I simply mean the giving and receiving in equal amounts. Mutuality in relationships is one of the best ways to balance charity and dignity. Let me pull out three things here, three insights I observed from this text briefly here this evening. Number one, Elijah comes as a prophet with God's word. But it is the widow who actually has the active faith. While this widow seems weak, it is actually her faith. It is her belief and her sacrificial behavior that is the mechanism by which Elijah and her family will eat and remain alive for nearly 3 years. It was the widow in this story whose faith activates the consistent blessing from God. It was the widow who actually risked something. She was the one who gave up her last resources in the hope of a future blessing. Number two, both Elijah and the widow are legacy bearers. They both leave a legacy. Elijah is one of the great prophets in all of Scripture. He's mentioned quite often in the Gospels, and he was also present along with Moses and Jesus at the Mount of Transfiguration. But the widow, she has a legacy too. When Jesus chose to preach his first sermon in his hometown of Nazareth, he actually references the widow Zarephath in his message. He lifts her up in his very, very first message. Number 3, both characters had needs. Now, the widow's needs are really clear and obvious. Her and her son were hungry. They needed food. And Elijah had needs too, even though they may not be easily recognizable. I believe that Elijah needed a family. In Psalm 68, verse 5 through 6, it describes the heart of God. And it says that God is really a father to the fatherless and a defender of widows. Verse 5 shows me how Elijah met the needs of this widow and her son in being a father to the fatherless and a defender of widows. But in verse 6, it goes on to say that God also sets the lonely in families. And this is where I believe the widow and the son meets a need of Elijah, whether he knew it or not. You know, staying in the widow's house was God's way, I believe, of showing Elijah what it meant to have a family. Being a prophet was a lonely, lonely job. Most of the prophets, they would spend their times in caves and wandering around. They did not have families. Even Jesus, being a great prophet, told his followers, I have no place to lay my head. It's a lonely job. And for almost 3 years, God places Elijah with a family. Staying in the house with the widow was meant to bring Elijah closer to the suffering that was also prevalent in the world and to acquaint him with hunger. Sure, he knew what it meant to be hungry sometimes, but God had provided through ravens with him on a daily basis. Elijah actually, he knew hunger a little bit, but he knew hunger from a male perspective, a male prophet, protected, privileged perspective. But he did not know hunger experienced as a woman. And he did not know hunger experienced as a mother, nor did he know hunger experienced from a child. Staying with the widow also showed Elijah that there was human suffering that took place outside of Israel. Far too often, we are only concerned with the needs of our family, our tribe, our church, our community, our neighborhood, and our nation. When in fact, the Bible teaches that God so loved the world that he gave his one and only son. I would imagine that most, if not all of us in this meeting, probably identify more with Elijah than we do the widow. Perhaps today we may be open to discover what God might be showing us as we engage to the service of the poor. Keep it in mind that mutuality lends itself to balance and charity and dignity. I want to thank you for joining us this evening, and I enjoy the rest of our program. Amen.
So thank you so much for joining us today for this chat, speaking with our volunteers across the country, including service leaders, the people that make Hope Worldwide what it is. We have with us Pamela Stringfield. She is the Neighborhood Engagement Coordinator for FCS Ministries. So welcome, Pamela, and thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Hi, everybody out there. Hope you guys are doing awesome. I know you're doing awesome work. But thank y'all so much for having me. It truly is a pleasure to be with y'all today. And I'm going to say y'all a lot. So just a heads up on that.
Bring it on. It's an honor to have you. And I want to start by asking you a question about a quote that I find to be very provocative and perhaps a little harsh, though it could be reasonably so. In some of Dr. Lupton's speaking, he reads this quote from 20th century French philosopher Jacques Ellul. I do not speak French, but
you're fine. Neither do I.
So Jacques says, almsgiving, which is charity, giving things to people, is Mammon's perversion of giving. It affirms the superiority of the giver, who thus gains a point on the recipient, binds him, demands gratitude, humiliates him, and reduces him to a lower state than he had before. Wow. Can you shed some light on how this quote might apply to our volunteers and their work in supporting their neighbors in their community?
Wow. Well, thank you, Jacques. That's a doozy of one. I will try to tackle this, and so you can let me know if I'm kind of, hitting where you guys are on this one. I usually respond a lot with stories, so you'll get a lot of my life in just that. So as I'm listening to the quote, a story comes to mind right away of part of my story is I grew up in Chattanooga. I grew up in a single family home. And I guess what you would call a stereotypical inner city family. So whatever that is, I kind of fit that. I grew up with that. And so yeah, father was not in the picture. And things were pretty bleak kind of early on. And so I remember us starting school and just being in that school from the time I was in the third grade until graduation. One particular day, well, just going to that school, again, I was not affluent, but all of my friends were. I remember feeling quite often the odd man out. And I just really longed to just feel like a regular person. And so I remember one day, I guess I had gotten some jeans from a friend. I had a cute little t-shirt. My hair was acting, right that day. I was feeling good. I was feeling like, yes, let's do this day. So I remember going to school and I had my little backpack on, my little lip gloss, and a cute boy was, right in front of me. And he was like walking towards me, like he was looking for me. And I was like, okay, it's going to be a great day. And so this boy is walking up to me and I'm excited. I'm like, oh. And all of a sudden from behind his back, he whips out this brown bag. That's a lunch sack. And he goes, "Hey, Pam, here's your lunch." And I went from feeling, and even now, like I have the emotions of it all. I can still feel myself as a sixth grader standing in that hallway and just going, for once, I felt like every other student. For a little while, I was like, I'm not the poor Black kid just trying to make it in this school, but I'm here. I'm with them. I'm one. And for a second, I felt normal. And then in a moment, I was reminded of my poverty. I was reminded that I'm not like everybody else. I'm reminded that there was something about me that was different. And so when I hear that quote, it nails that for me, of just that sentiment of a lot of times we have good intentions. That little kid, he probably has never thought about that a day in his life. He's gone on, he's lived his life. His mom, his dad, his caretakers, they intended no harm to me, none. They really were trying to look out for me and provide something that we legitimately needed. My little brother and I, we did not have lunches that day. So it was a legit need. It was something we were dependent on. But along with them giving that need or meeting that need, it actually highlighted that I was different. That my family was unable to afford the basics that we needed. And then I felt some type of way, but I couldn't say anything because I needed what they offered. And so when I think about that quote, it just reminds me of that we, even in our good intentions, we can often do harm. I was again reminded that I'm different from everybody else. Dr. Lupton has this quote, which I love, like he's quoted it a million times, but it goes a little bit like, you give once, you create appreciation. You give twice, you create anticipation. You give a third time, expectation, a fourth time, entitlement, a fifth time, dependency. And so just in that, and I remember as I went through that year or through those years, I would, it was nice to get those lunches, but month after month, year after year, my different friend groups would come up to me and hand me lunches. And it was just another reminder that I'm not like all the other kids. And so they did, in their kindness, try to find discreet ways to get that to me. But it was still this reminder that I'm not y'all. I'm not you. And it not that it keeps you in your place, but it keeps you in a space where I'm poor, that I'm different, that I'm not like y'all. And so I'm sure there was other ways to approach that, but for me, that's what it gets after, of that unintentionality of doing harm. And so, yeah, so as we think about our giving, it's great. Like, I don't want to slap anybody's hands and make them feel like, oh my gosh, doing good or recognizing a need and trying to help with that need is a bad thing. It's not. But we also have to do a little bit of interrogating our own hearts in order to answer, like, what is my desired goal in my benevolence? Like, we have to kind of go upstream in our minds and go, yes, this little girl or that kid or that family has maybe this crisis need. But if we notice year after year, month after month, whatever, if it's this ongoing thing, we might need to start asking some different questions. And we probably want to get those people involved in the giving if it's going to be a perpetual thing. So, it's important to ask, like, what is my desired goal in my giving, in my benevolence? Is my heart, am I here to try to meet their need? Or how can I get people involved in this actual process? Can I be a curious participant in hearing them articulate their experience without taking it personally or being offended or even retracting my support? So if I would have gone to that little boy and said, you guys really hurt my feelings, he probably would have said to his mom, they don't like the lunches, and they would have stopped. And we needed those. We needed we needed what they provided, but we also needed something more. We needed a deeper conversation. And so if we just hand somebody a bag, we may not get to what's underneath that, or what are they experiencing on the other side of that benevolent giving, if that makes any sense. And so what I've noticed in our, kind of handing somebody a bag of stuff without actually going upstream in our conversations or in our thinking, it actually, it's become a big problem. One of the big problems in our poverty alleviation efforts is that the implementation or the design, it actually heightens that poverty thing in both people. So we all have that poverty thing, like, just because you have, material wealth doesn't mean that you don't have a poverty of something. But, it's a poverty of the rich person, as the book says, of that God complex of, I have something that you guys need and I can help you. And everybody wants to be in a place where we can give something away. It's altogether a different feeling when you're on the receiving side, especially if you're on the receiving side over and over and over again. And it even gets really crazy if people presume that you're on the receiving side. So if you come into a low income community and you just set up shop with your banjo and your guitar, and you're going to feed the people or do a Bible club, or all that stuff is good, but we presume that's what the community wants, versus saying, I want to just sit and just, grab a Coke and a smile and sit and just hang out and ask some questions and share my story and learn more about, what's going on with you, or you say this and I become a curious participant in your story, versus just going, I need to perpetuate this program. And so it unintentionally says, you come in as the giver of, all of us, it's really subtle, but you have a bit of a God complex. I can have it too. So I'm not trying to make someone feel the heavy, but if I'm in a place of having something, I can easily make myself like, oh, this gives me something, gives me a little charge to come in and give you something. But it also, for the person who receives it, it could potentially exacerbate the feeling of I'm inferior, and this shame or this otherness that's not keeping in step with you being an image bearer, that you have something to bring. And generosity is not just something that people with means have. But if you don't have material wealth, it doesn't mean that you're poor. You have other things that you can actually bring to the table. And so for us to be able to affirm that as well and see that as well. And again, just going back to my initial point, just being able to interrogate or ask more questions, ask our own hearts, what is my desired outcome in my benevolent giving?
You talked a little bit about shame, inferiority, otherness, some messages that can be communicated to our neighbors. So oftentimes people, including the folks on this call, or many of the folks on this call, will seek to support neighbors who experience material poverty or need, definitely children in under-resourced areas, and sometimes that will include supply drives or Christmas toy drives.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk more about the negative messages that someone might receive if they are a recipient in an event like those that I just described?
Yeah. Well, I think one of my jumping off points is, even from to answer the first question a little bit too, but just the phrase that comes to mind is relief work or charity isn't or cannot change chronic issues. And so and we'll get to this probably in our conversation, but there is a place for relief work, but to recognize, am I perpetuating relief work? Or do we need to move towards more of a developmental work? Are there chronic things? Will they continue to need what it is I'm providing? Or is it kind of like, oh my goodness, the pandemic hit and we all have to kind of flex and figure something else. We've got to pivot. And so you have to figure out something. You have to figure out that pivot space. But if it's a perpetual thing, then we need to ask some different questions, because I would venture to say that if it is a perpetual thing, if it's a chronic issue, then our programs will have to be altered, because we know that relief work does not change chronic issues. So your question, the one-way giving. So I think about, of course, I have stories. So I think about two things that come to mind. There's a guy from this past year. We host an annual toy store, and we can talk about that later if we want to. But every year we host a toy store in our community in place of a toy drive. And so in this particular store this past year, I don't know what made me do it, but I was standing there and this gentleman was checking out, and he was walking out of the store, or he was standing in line checking out. And he was just kind of like this big-eyed, just kind of looking around. And he was at least like 6'2", huge guy, but he just kind of looked like this little kid. He was just kind of in amazement. He was looking around, and I don't know what possessed me, but I was like, how did you find this? Like, I just started talking to him, and he was standing there, and he turned his whole body towards me. This huge guy, and I'm like 5'2", so he was huge, and he just like melted in front of me, and just told me this really, really precious story. He was like, "Ma'am, this morning I got up and I looked up, and I don't even know why I feel emotional today. Oh my goodness!" But he said, up, and he was like, "Lord, I don't know where I'm gonna, go to get toys for my kids." Like, it's like a week before Christmas. And he was like, "I don't know where I'm gonna go to get toys for my kids, but I need something today." He's like, "I got this much money in my pocket." And he said, "I got in my car and I just started driving." His mom called him and she was like, "Babe, I found this flyer in this other thing that we had supplied to this community." And so she's like, she read the flyer to him, and he wasn't sure where all the details were, but he found us and he walked in and he was like, "Ma'am, you have no idea the prayer I prayed this morning, and you guys have superseded that. Like, I didn't know where I was going to go, but I was able to come in here this morning with my little bit of money and do more than what I thought I could do. And I can also buy things for my family, like for my friends, like my homeboy's kids, like he has got twins, and he was able to buy some really nice things for their kids. Not like little trinket stuff, but like nice things." And he was like, "I'm blown away right now. Like, I don't even understand. I just feel like if this was for nobody else, it's for me." Wow, I'll get emotional. And so that's what we're trying to do. Like, I was definitely on the receiving end of, I've been in food kitchens. I've stood in those lines. I've been in those, where you have to walk into a room in a line and somebody says, "Here's your number, Miss So-and-so, come get your bag of groceries, food, whatever the thing is." And then you leave and go home. But to have a space where a dad that morning, like, prayed a Hail Mary prayer, and found by that before the sun set, this man found a place of abundance. Not just come get a little bit and go home, but take what you have and watch me multiply it. Watch God be abundant to the materially poor. And I mean, that's just phenomenal. And if it was just hey, come and get your little bit and go home, it's just perpetuating, like, poor people, come get what you need, get a little bit and go home, and I'll see you next time. But our approach to this interdependent relationship, this moving from just serving a neighbor, relief neighbor work, to holistic community development, it actually says we want to perpetuate a space where abundance can really happen, where neighbors can not just have a little bit and get by, but flourish. be able to walk into the capacity to be generous towards other people. Because generosity, I think, as I said before, it's not just a thing for people who have means, but everybody has the ability to be generous. Everybody has the ability to be hospitable. And so I saw this person who would technically be materially poor, like just flourish, like he came alive and he had more than enough, not just for his family, but for his, like it spilled over so he could be a blessing to other people. That's what we're trying to do. It's not enough just to do a little bit and say, y'all, get by on a little bit, but what can we do so that you can actually do more to be a blessing? Because you have the ability to be a blessing. We just want to help that be a possibility. And then another message, at least for me, I'll just be, again, really personal, because that's how I am. And I come from a faith-based background. I don't know if that's true for many of you. But for me, I remember growing up and thinking, God really, he must prefer white people over brown and black people, because they always have it good. They always have enough. They have all the things that they need. Meanwhile, over here, there's literally hundreds of us struggling. And we all pretty much look the same. And one of my friends, he has this thing called the Cold Water Collective. And he asked the question, why is my bucket always empty while yours perpetually full? And so relief work just continues, says, hey, I have a full bucket. You don't have enough. I'm just going to keep pouring it. Great. I need some water. You got some water? Give me a cup of cold water. Scripture says that. The brother needs a cup of cold water. Give him a cold water. He needs something to drink. He needs something to eat. He needs a blanket. He needs a tunic. He needs a whatever. Help that. And we need to also ask ourselves that question. Why is your bucket always empty while your bucket, whoever, is always full? What things can we do to help either change the bucket, go upstream? We just need to ask some different questions. So again, relief work addresses that, giving that person a cold cup of water so they can take a bit of respite, catch their breath, feel human again, get a bit of reprieve. But we just cannot leave people in communities there. We cannot just stay relief neighbor work. We really need to move to holistic neighborhood development, where we see a whole neighborhood develop. And we know that poverty is many branches. It's not just this one and done thing. It's not like give this person a cup of cold water and it's all good.
One of the things I do want to highlight that you said is that if I may ask, it doesn't sound like you're saying we should not give things. Is that correct?
Yes. It's a yes and no. So again, if we just, again, if the point is if we see a situation that requires relief, again, that's discerning what that is. You may have a metrics for what that is. If you don't, I'll just put a plug in right here, the Lupton Center. We would love to help you, figure those things out, walk with you so that you can actually do a great job of assessing what the needs of the community are. And so if you go into a situation or hear about a situation, of course, like lend your brother, your sister a cup of cold water, help where those crisis situations are happening. Make a child a lunch if they need a lunch for school. Like I'm not saying we don't need to do those things. And we also need to ask questions by being proximate and being willing to partner with neighbors. How do we draw near to ask some more questions, ask deeper questions? Are there greater things going on? And am I willing to engage with those greater things? It's easy for me to make a PB&J and give it to you and keep it moving. But Holy Spirit might be asking me to lean in and ask some different questions. He might need me to say, oh, bring somebody into my home, or what system is actually perpetuating this current crisis. And so I'm just asking us to consider both. We cannot do one without the other. Yes, address that immediate need. But if you see that kind of, flare up, there's something deeper going on underneath the surface. And so we have to be willing to look underneath the hood.
Thank you for that wealth of knowledge. Your humility and energy are so exciting and very, very helpful. Pamela, it's been an honor to speak with you. Thank you so much for your time and advice.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Kendall. Thank you, everyone, for having me today. It's been truly an honor to share. And God bless you and your work.
Hi everyone, my name is Cambry Bergeret. I just finished my freshman year at the University of South Carolina and have been very active with Hope Worldwide as a youth volunteer and member of the National Youth Advisory Council. I became personally involved with Hope back in 2017 after serving on my first Hope Volunteer Corps in the Philippines, and now I'm serving my third year on the National Youth Advisory Council. I want to start out by thanking Pamela for sharing her heart and being so vulnerable and real about her experience. My two favorite takeaways from her sharing are, number one, good intentions are not enough and can actually cause harm, and number two, we need to be curious participants, proximate and willing to partner. I am currently reading the book Walking with the Poor by Brian L. Myers, and these two takeaways from Pamela's sharing immediately reminded me of this quote. It reads, "Our human selves are embedded in relationships, finding their fullest meaning in just and harmonious relationships, or losing meaning and worth when these relationships don't work." I think it's so easy for us to forget that God is in relationship with Jesus and the Holy Spirit, and us, being made in the image of God, to be human is to be in relationship with our environment and those around us. We have this incredible opportunity to be the hands and feet of Jesus, so how can we interact with others like Jesus did and empower rather than diminish them? I want to preface this by saying I am no expert in this topic, and I am still learning myself how to honor the dignity of those I serve. For those of you who are not familiar, NIAC, or the National Youth Advisory Council, is a cohort of high school and college students who are being trained to mobilize youth within their respective cities in sustainable service. As a part of the cohort, I have two main responsibilities: fundraising for Hope Worldwide's youth programs and chartering a passion program in my community. For my passion program, I worked with the Hope Worldwide Denver chapter and the family service coordinators at the Boulevard 1 community apartment complex to start a relational program where my team, in collaboration with members of the community, organized fun events for the families each month. I want to share with you how I honored the dignity of the community I served, starting with our very first conversation. So I got connected with the family service coordinators at the apartment complex, and they essentially said, "There's not a space for the residents to build relationships, and this has put a strain on the Boulevard 1 community. This is our biggest need at the moment. Can you help?" Of course, I was so excited, and as I responded to this email, ideas were coursing through my brain of we could do this or this and that. However, I had no knowledge of the patterns or needs of the Boulevard 1 community and no pre-existing relationships within it, yet I already had solutions, and these solutions were solely based on assumptions. So I stepped back, challenged my thought processes, and in my response to the coordinators, instead of bringing solutions, I typed, "I can't wait to meet with you. Is there any way we can pull in a resident who is involved in the community and can provide more insight into how we can best structure a program to create a space for relationship building?" I vividly remember walking into the first meeting, super pumped up and ready to brainstorm. It was me, the family service coordinator, and a mom and her young son who lived in the complex. The mom's perspective was super valuable from living and interacting in the community, and she brought in ideas that I would have never thought of, like starting a community garden or tutoring program for the kids. And while we weren't able to execute every idea, we engaged in a meaningful exchange where everyone had a voice. Through this, I've learned that relationships are not something you're supposed to control. They're something that you're supposed to share. So we have to be diligent in reserving a spot at the table for members of the community to be involved in all of our planning efforts. Another really cool outcome that came from this conversation was a better look at the why the relational need was so high and why past ideas that were implemented did not work. I think it's important to note here that people are inseparable from their social systems and environments. Pamela even posed the question, what systems are perpetuating this current crisis? For my program, we discovered that parents in the community were really stretched thin and had no room on their plates for social events. So this pointed us more in the direction of a kids or family-friendly program with an option for the kids to be dropped off so that the parents could utilize that time to rest. We must look at a person's situation holistically and in relation to their environment, and the first step is to learn and ask questions about community patterns so that then we can effectively support through development like Pamela suggested. This, however, takes a lot of humility and acknowledging that I am not here because I am more qualified to be here, and the people I serve have so much to offer me in my poverty and the community, relationally, spiritually, through bringing ideas, etc. With this heart, we can then go on to dream collaboratively with our neighbors and work to empower those that we serve. The overall focus of this training was on honoring dignity when it comes to collections and drives, and pulling members of the community into our planning is still of utmost importance here. However, to do this, we need to have hearts driven by empathy. You have to reach into yourself and reflect on how being on the receiving end of certain collections and drives would make you feel, and put yourself into the parent's or child's shoes. It's a simple yet powerful mindset shift to utilize in honoring dignity. So I challenge you to look closely at if your service is truly fueled by a heart of empathy, humility, and collaboration, or if it's pride and the desire to glorify yourself rather than God. Thank you so much for letting me share.
Hello, fellow volunteers. Such an honor to be here with you right now, discussing this topic, just how we can be more respectful and thoughtful in our service, how we can honor the dignity of those in our communities, and really even just stay humble ourselves. So I'm super honored to be able to share right now about some practicals in how we can work alongside our communities. And honestly, this is stuff that I'm learning. It is not stuff that I have mastered. Feel free as I'm talking, if you have thoughts or comments, pop those up in the chat window. If you have content that you think would be super helpful to add or links to extra research, feel free to keep that conversation going. So, all right, let's begin. So today we are going to talk about practical tips for working alongside your community. To review, we have heard the term one-way giving, and that's when we give items or money to a person or group. So that's just merely items, your clothing drives, your toy drives, school supply drives. And we've discussed how sometimes this is necessary, especially in crisis situations. This is a really important thing for us to be doing. And in those moments, it's super important for us to give with an open hand and an open heart and without judgment. Unfortunately, we often find ourselves stuck in these one-way giving efforts. Year after year, items are collected and distributed without further thought to the people or the community receiving them. And we heard Pamela share about the dangers of how this can damage the dignity of the recipients. When we're engaged in only one-way giving, we miss out on valuable partnerships, we're more subject to burnout, and honestly, we fail to guard our own hearts against a savior mentality. So the question becomes, how do we offer a sort of meaningful exchange so that those receiving the items might feel less like charity cases and more like partners in a process? One good way to think about this is to do with instead of do for. So do with instead of do for, whenever possible. Where do we begin? So where do we begin? Partnering with existing community organizations really is the key. And when we say community organizations, what we're referring to are organizations such as Boys and Girls Clubs, YMCAs, your local school, food pantry, community center. These are the places that really have a pulse on gaps of resources within your community. And some of you on this call may be thinking of some other organizations also. Please feel free, throw those up in the chat. It's always super helpful to have other ideas that maybe aren't mentioned here. So when you partner with a community organization, what we're thinking of is really walking alongside of them with what they are already doing. So this could be as an individual, this could be as a group, but really what you're doing is you're working together to provide extra opportunities to your local community. A really important question to ask is, does the organization you are considering honor the dignity of its community members? So there's some ways that you can answer this question. You can consult the experts. So talk to the teachers, first responders, social workers, medical professionals. Have they heard of the organization you are considering? Can they recommend one that they feel is respectful in their approach? So this is when you're sort of looking at the landscape and you're thinking, okay, these are the organizations around me that are potential partners. Go to the people that you know within your congregations, within your neighborhood. Go to these experts and ask them these questions. Check out social media. Check out their website, their Facebook page, other social media. Does their mission statement or other communication talk about partnering with community members? Or do they use language that affirms strength instead of highlighting the weakness of the community members? Look at how much the staff resembles the community. Or even better, have they hired people to work for them who come from the community? And I think this is super important. What do they highlight in their social media? Do they highlight themselves? Do they highlight their own efforts? Or do they really highlight the community and the strengths of the community around them? Take a tour. This is a great way to learn about someone you may be considered partnering with. Ask to arrange a time when you can come and see the facility and organization. Do you see community members actively engaged in the daily work? That's a great sign of how well they're partnering with their community. Be curious. Ask respectful questions about how the organization functions, how they are sustained, what their goals and their visions are for the community. Be a learner, and don't be afraid to pay a sincere compliment if you are inspired along the way. So here's another situation, and I think this one is really common in several of our Hope chapters. You already have a relationship with a community partner, but you're actually not sure that they're practicing the concept of doing with rather than doing for. That's a tough one. So how do you have a conversation that doesn't feel awkward or make them feel bad or disrespected? It's a great question. You can share what you're learning. I think this is really a huge learning curve for all of us, and I think it's something that we keep learning along the way. Share the books you're reading. Share the recording from this class if you think that would be helpful. You can talk. Have coffee together. Discuss how you can transition your current efforts to something more sustainable. Give time. Some of the things you may ask or some of the things you may mention in conversation is, I was reading about a local organization that runs a pop-up school supply store to provide parents the dignity of meaningful exchange instead of receiving charity year after year. May I send you that information? It's a great question. You may say, I was wondering what you might think about inviting community members to partner in a greater way in the toy distribution by inviting them to join in as volunteers. Now, of course, I would put this in your own words, but this is just a couple of examples how you might foster conversation towards more mutual respectful giving. I think one of the most important things to remember is to be patient. We often think of generosity in the form of a tangible gift. Giving our time to pursue crucial conversations is also an act of generosity. It may take a long time to have these conversations. It may take a lot of persuasion with your community partner to identify ways to convince them, to identify ways to transition out of one-way efforts. And along the way, you may find yourself needing to continue in one-way giving as you have these conversations. And that's okay. Those one-way giving efforts often help sustain the relationship and build trust while waiting for growth in an obvious way forward. So this is a great example on what this may look like. I want to tell you a story. It's a great example of one of our chapter directors and how they really persevered through this process with one of their community partners. So they were working together with a police station, strictly one-way giving efforts, toy drives, school supplies, backpacks. Over the course of a year, the chapter director would have a conversation with the police station about honoring dignity and empowering and involving the community. This took a year. I mean, it was a slow transformation over a long time. But eventually, this chapter director was able to institute some family fun nights. Now they have parent volunteers. They have community potlucks. And now they have a community Christmas store in place of a toy drive. And it's still developing. It's a conversation that is continuing. And along the way, they have had to engage in the one-way giving. And And really, in a way, their one-way giving demonstrated their loyalty to the community. And so I think it's just really important for all of us to remember that it may take time. We may need to be patient, but as we persevere and as we demonstrate our loyalty and our commitment to the community, things can change and things can develop. So let's talk about a few practical outreach initiatives that we tend to have in our Hope chapters. These are super common. We've just chosen 2 for time's sake. But so the first one is our Christmas toy drives, holiday parties. Those are sort of synonymous often with each other. Our Christmas toy drives, that's when we collect a lot of toys and then we go and we give them out. I think, some things to consider. This is something that I find, members really enjoy. It's really fun to go buy a toy. And this is something I think that makes our volunteers feel good. But how can we use this in a meaningful way and something that actually still preserves dignity and honors our communities? I think we can consider foster care or other special parenting service organizations, such as children of incarcerated people. For foster parents or caregivers for children of incarcerated parents, they're actually less apt to feel like charity cases and more relieved to receive the extra help. If you do this, the most important thing to do is to honor the expertise of the caregiver or foster parents. Ask them to lead you to which gifts to provide. Follow their instruction. They know the kids best. So another thing to consider is to donate to an existing community Christmas store. A community Christmas store is a temporary store set up in a community where donated toys are sold at garage sale prices, and the money that comes in goes straight back into the community. You can actually Google it or search for Pride for Parents. There's a lot of how-tos on how to do this type of community Christmas store. The important part is to donate the toys to organizations that are providing dignity-preserving support. And finally, if you really must do a holiday event in an under-resourced community, such as a Christmas party, always, always, always first find out if the community already has an event organized. Maybe your volunteers could support that party. If you're going to plan one, talk to community leaders and embedded organizations first. The very best outcome would be to let the community lead the effort with your help, or the community at least to be a central part of the planning. So now let's talk about school supply drives. It's super important to remember items such as school supplies are absolutely necessary. What we don't want to do when we consider one-way giving efforts is to be reactionary and think, oh my gosh, if I can't figure out how to not one-way give, I won't give at all. We definitely don't want to encourage that reaction. I think a question to help guide this type of giving is, who does the hero need to be in this story? For school supply drives, again, it's very important to allow the teachers and staff, if possible, to be the heroes. So what do we mean by this? What we mean by this is we allow them to actually distribute the supplies that are donated. It will mean much more to a child to receive a backpack full of supplies that they need for the school year from their teacher than it will be, honestly, from any of your volunteers, any of us. They may not see our face again. Hopefully, we can create ongoing relationships with these schools, but they will see these teachers every day. It's so important to allow the teachers to be the hero. As we mentioned also with toy drives, reach out to foster care families and social workers. Donate to families who can then give their children the supplies. And when these children receive these items from people that they know, from people that they are close to, then those are the people who become the heroes in their eyes. I just can't emphasize that enough. Finally, I love this idea. Create a school supply store. If you have a school, maybe one of your volunteers is a teacher or on staff at a school, and you can actually use all of the donated supplies to create a store where supplies are sold at a super low cost. Maybe you could even use reward points instead of money, but definitely underprice the donated supplies. You allow the parents to volunteer, and then all of the profits can go directly back into the school. Let the parents know that whatever they're paying for the donated school supplies will go straight back into supporting their children. And that lets the parents be the heroes. So this is a lot of content. I know not only am I giving my 15 minutes of practicals, but this whole call is full of so much great stuff. And then on top of that, every volunteer, every social program, initiative, and community are so unique. So if you take anything away from this, from these brief practicals, this is how I would summarize this. 1, ask questions. Are you doing for, or are you doing with? How can we include community members in any and all types of outreach? And what conversations can I be having? Do I need to be having conversations with my existing community partners? Do I need to be initiating conversations with potential partnerships? Be patient. It just takes time. It takes time to build relationships, and all sincere, respectful, mutual giving is built upon a relationship. So be patient. Let your generosity include the time you take to have fruitful conversations toward mutual giving. And never forget that one-way giving can actually be a stepping stone toward positive development. And finally, clarify the hero. Anyone who plays a prominent and consistent role in the lives of the community members should rightfully own the hero status. We can walk alongside of them, hold up their arms, fully support them, but they are really the heroes in these stories. So thank you so much for your time. It has been a pleasure sharing with you, and so excited to learn alongside of all of you as we move forward with these things. Have a great night.
What a great note to end on. And not just because Thank You for Being a Friend is the greatest TV show theme song of all time, hands down. But again, thank you for being a friend, because it's these friendships, these active relationships we've built in our communities that have provided this invaluable insight about what it means to give in a way that is respectful and impactful. And when I say give, I mean giving material things, or giving support instead of or in addition to material donations. So we are not asking that you stop giving things. Sometimes that is absolutely crucial and the best option. However, what I do hope you walk away with first is encouragement for the incredible generosity you have shown to your neighbors. I also hope that you take away some ideas about how and when to go beyond the traditional practice of giving things, how to be thoughtful about these decisions, and how to be more like Jesus as we continue to grow in our community outreach. Finally, as we continue to learn together, it's my hope that we do so with humility and with the joy that comes from relationships with one another. Thank you so much to all of our fabulous speakers, and thank you for joining us.